Hi, welcome back, or welcome for the first time. Either way, glad you're here. Get comfortable, we're going to be here for a while. Tonight I want to talk about Adventure Time. And I know, on the surface that sounds like an odd choice for a sleep video. It's a show about a boy and his magical dog going on adventures in a post-apocalyptic candy kingdom. It's colourful, it's loud, it has a character who yells unacceptable at a very high pitch, and another who eats the colour red, and a sentient video game console that makes breakfast and has a complicated inner life. Not exactly what you'd call soothing material on the surface of it. But here's the thing about Adventure Time that I've always found quietly remarkable. The world already ended. Before the first episode, before Finn and Jake ever went on a single adventure, something called the Mushroom War happened, and essentially wiped out human civilization as we know it. The ruins are still there. If you look at the background art in almost any episode, you'll find old cars buried in hillsides, collapsed buildings overgrown with vines, remnants of roads and infrastructure slowly disappearing under centuries of new life. The apocalypse happened. It's over. And what grew back in its place is this strange, warm, ridiculous world full of candy people and vampire queens and sentient clouds who just want to have a nice day. There's something genuinely comforting about that, I think. Not in a cloying way. The show doesn't pretend everything is fine. It's full of loss and grief and characters who carry deep damage from things that happened to them centuries ago. But the basic register of the world is, the worst thing happened. And here we all still are, getting on with it, baking apple pies, playing bass guitar, having arguments about nothing. The Land of Ooo is, in that sense, a very livable place to spend a few hours. What I want to do tonight is go character by character through the show and spend some time with each of them. Not recapping plots, or, well, not only recapping plots, but thinking about the philosophy each character embodies. What worldview they represent. What they're actually working through, underneath all the magic and the nonsense. Because Adventure Time, for all its cartoonish energy, is genuinely one of the more philosophically rich shows ever made for any audience. The things it's interested in, identity, mortality, the ethics of control, what it means to love someone across centuries, what happens to your sense of self when your memories are taken from you, are things actual philosophers have written actual books about. The show just also has a character who exists primarily to yell at things, and that character is very funny. We'll be moving through the major characters in roughly the order they feel natural to me. Finn first, then Jake, then into Princess Bubblegum and Marceline and the Ice King, then some of the stranger corners of the cast. Some sections will be longer because the character has more to sit with, some will be shorter and we'll drift through them more gently. The idea isn't to be comprehensive in an academic sense. The idea is to spend time in this world, think about it alongside me, and maybe come away feeling like you understand something you didn't before. If you're new to the channel, we do a lot of this kind of thing here. Long, unhurried dives into fictional worlds and the ideas inside them. It's the sort of video I like to put on late at night when I don't want to be doing anything demanding, but I do still want my brain to have something gentle to turn over. If that sounds like your kind of thing, the subscribe button is right there, and it would honestly make my day. But no pressure, we've got a lot of ground to cover. So, the Land of Ooo, a world that survived its own ending. A boy named Finn, a dog named Jake, a candy kingdom, a vampire queen, and centuries of accumulated philosophy buried underneath all the jokes about butts. Let's begin. The obvious place to start is Finn. He's the protagonist. He's the character the show is nominally about. The one the audience is supposed to follow as their entry point into Ooo. He is, for most of the show's early run, a 12-year-old human boy with a white hat, a green backpack, a sword he picked up somewhere, and an absolutely uncomplicated commitment to doing good. That last part is what makes him interesting, philosophically, not because simple goodness is simple, it turns out it really isn't, but because the show takes his sincerity completely seriously. It doesn't mock him for it. It doesn't position his earnestness as naivety that needs to be corrected. Finn genuinely, unironically, believes that evil should be defeated and good should prevail, and he acts on that belief constantly, and the show treats this as a legitimate way to be in the world. For a while, at least. Because what Adventure Time is quietly doing with Finn over 10 seasons is asking a question that doesn't get asked enough about heroes. What happens to a person who has built their entire identity around a role? What happens when the world stops providing clean opportunities to perform that role? When the enemies get complicated, when the victories stop feeling like victories, when you're not 12 anymore and the sword is heavier and the things you're fighting turn out to have their own valid perspectives. Finn's journey is, in essence, the story of someone learning that being good isn't a thing you achieve and then have. It's a practice. You do it imperfectly, repeatedly, for your whole life, and it costs you things. He starts out with such clarity. In the early seasons, the structure is almost fairy tale simple. There is a problem. Finn and Jake go and solve it. Someone is saved, the day is won. And Finn is luminously happy in this structure. He's found his thing. He knows who he is. He is the hero. Full stop. The first real crack in this comes not from an external enemy, but from his father, which turns out to be more complicated than fighting anything with a sword. Martin Mertens, Finn's biological father, turns out to be alive. He's been in a space prison for crimes the show is somewhat cagey about specifying. When Finn finally makes contact with him, across a season and a half of anticipation, the payoff is genuinely awkward to watch. Martin is charming, he's funny, he's charismatic in the way that people who have spent their lives not taking responsibility often are. Very easy to be around, very easy to like, very difficult to actually count on, and he doesn't feel that bad about abandoning Finn. He offers explanations, but not quite apologies. He's not malicious, he's just hollow in a particular way. Like someone who learned early that being likable was a reasonable substitute for being present. Finn spends an episode building a mechanical arm out of psychic grief energy, specifically so he can punch Martin in space. He gets all the way there. He floats outside the prison, arm raised, and then doesn't do it. Because there's nothing to punch, really. The person he wanted to confront doesn't have the remorse that the confrontation required. He comes back down, he grieves it, he doesn't become bitter about it, which is probably the most remarkable thing. Now, talking a bit about the arm, because the arm is actually a recurring motif through the entire show, and it's worth spending a moment on. Finn loses his right arm multiple times, in different timelines, in dream sequences, in the main narrative. It becomes almost a signature of his character across alternate versions of himself. There's a version of Finn in the farm world dimension, a reality where the Mushroom War never happened, who grows up in a human family, farming, reasonably happy. That Finn also loses his arm. Finn's reincarnations across past lives tend to be missing an arm. It's the show's quiet way of telling you that certain things about a person travel with them. The arm loss in the main narrative, when the grass sword becomes permanently fused to him and then ripped away, is the show's way of forcing Finn to confront something he'd been avoiding. His identity isn't his heroics. His heroics are something he does. They're not what he is. When he can't do them, when he's literally missing the limb he fights with, he has to figure out what remains. What remains is a person, a kind, somewhat confused, steadily maturing young person. The show is willing to sit with the unheroicness of that for a while. Since we're on the topic of Finn and identity across time, there's an episode called The Vault, which is one of the stranger and more quietly moving episodes in the series. Finn has been having nightmares. He's suppressing some memory that he can't access, and when he finally opens the mental vault, he discovers that he has past lives. His previous incarnation was a one-armed thief named Shoko, who befriended Princess Bubblegum in Oo's distant past, and then, in a moment of terrible weakness, betrayed her. This is interesting for a few reasons. One is the obvious karmic implication. Finn's missing arm across multiple lives isn't random, it's the shape of something recurring. Another is what it says about the relationship between past failures and present goodness. Finn, in his current life, is trying to do right by PB and by Oo, partly because something in him carries the weight of a time when he didn't. He doesn't remember Shoko consciously. He couldn't articulate any of this, but the past is there, in the structure of who he is. The show doesn't over-explain this. It drops it in and moves on. I find that restraint genuinely admirable. The farm world Finn I mentioned earlier is worth dwelling on a moment. In the 3-part episode, Finn the Human, Jake the Dog, we see the alternate timeline where Simon Petrikov, the man who becomes the Ice King, used the crown to stop the Mushroom War before it fully escalated. As a result, the world is largely still human. Finn has a family. He has parents, siblings, a normal life by Oo standards. He's happy enough, A bit restless maybe, but basically fine. What he doesn't have is any of the things that made our Finn who he is. The loss, the training, the years of fighting evil and learning what good actually costs. None of it happened. So he's kind because Finn is constitutionally kind, but he's not wise. He hasn't earned the wisdom yet. And there's something bittersweet about that version of him. Because you look at farm world Finn and think, this is probably the better life, by most external measures. He has a family, he's safe, he's not routinely risking his neck in dungeons, but he's also not quite Finn yet. He's the material, not the thing the material becomes. By the time we see Finn in the Distant Lands special Together Again, which takes place long after the main series, when Finn is an adult and then eventually an old man, he's someone the show has genuinely earned. He's spent a life doing the thing, imperfectly, with setbacks, with grief, with all the attendant complications of growing up in a world as strange as Ooo. And he's still himself, still fundamentally oriented toward good. Not because it's easy, because he chose it, over and over, when it wasn't. The final image of Finn in Together Again, reunited with Jake in the afterlife, both of them at peace, is not a triumphant ending. It's a quiet one. Two people who lived their lives as well as they could and are now resting. There's a philosophical concept sometimes called moral luck. The idea that some of our moral achievements are partly a function of the circumstances we're lucky enough to find ourselves in. Finn has extraordinary moral luck in some ways. He was found by adoptive parents who raised him with love. He was dropped into a world that gave him meaningful things to fight for. But the show takes pains to show that he still had to choose, repeatedly, to be the person his circumstances made possible. Luck opened the door. He still had to walk through it every day. The thing about Finn that makes him worth spending time with, as a character and as a philosophical case study, is that his heroism never stops costing him anything. He loses his arm. He loses a father he hoped would be better. He loses relationships. He loses the comfortable certainty of early adolescence. He doesn't stop, not because he's made of steel, the show makes it very clear he's not, but because the practice of trying to do good turns out to be, for him, what gives his life structure and meaning. He's not a nihilist who's worked out that nothing matters. He's something rarer, someone who genuinely believes things matter and acts accordingly, all the way through. The show never lets that look easy. But it also never suggests Finn was wrong to do it. There's one more thread with Finn that I want to pull on before moving on. His relationship with Flame Princess, his first serious romantic relationship, is philosophically interesting, not for the romance itself, but for the specific failure at its end and how Finn handles that failure. He manipulated her emotions in order to use her fire as a weapon in a fight with the Ice King. She found out, she left him, and Finn, characteristically, blamed himself not in a theatrical way, but in the quiet way of someone genuinely reckoning with having been unkind to someone he loved. The show gives him this grief without resolving it quickly. There's an episode called The Tower, already mentioned in the context of his father. But it's also doing something about the Flame Princess relationship. The mechanical arm he builds out of psychic grief energy to punch his absent father is channeling more than one loss. Finn at this point is grieving both the father, who wasn't what he needed, and the relationship that ended because he wasn't what she needed. He doesn't get to punch either. He just has to come back down. He does come back down. He always does. This is Finn's defining quality, and it's the one that's hardest to learn and easiest to undervalue. The return. The choosing to come back, to participate again after disappointment. Not with artificial positivity, not pretending the loss didn't happen. Just, okay, that happened. And now what? There's a version of Finn, the one who could exist after everything that happens to him, who gives up, who decides the heroism is too costly, who becomes cynical or closed or simply tired. The show knows this. It shows us versions of Finn where things went differently, and the outcome is worse. Our Finn keeps choosing differently, not because he's naive, because he's decided it's what he wants to be. The philosophical term sometimes used for this is moral integrity, the alignment between your stated values and your actual choices over time, especially when the choices are difficult and the cost is real. Finn has this. It's not given to him. He maintains it, badly sometimes, imperfectly often, but genuinely. Jake the dog is Finn's best friend, adoptive brother, and magical companion. He's a dog, a golden-coloured dog with enormous expressive eyes, who can stretch and reshape his body into any size or shape he wants. He can become a balloon, a boat, a house, a tiny ball, a giant fist. The stretchy power is hereditary, sort of, though the origin of it is somewhat tangled up in demon magic and his father Joshua's adventuring history. We'll get there. But before any of that, the most important thing about Jake is something much simpler. Jake is genuinely content, not blandly happy in the way of characters who exist just to be supportive, not oblivious, not unintelligent. He's actually wise in several respects. He just doesn't need to make suffering into an identity, and that turns out to be rarer and more philosophically interesting than it sounds. There's a quote that gets attributed to Jake. Dude, sucking at something is the first step to being sort of good at something. That I think about more than is probably reasonable. It's not a profound insight in the traditional sense. It's not from a book of philosophy. It's a line delivered by a cartoon dog to comfort his friend. But it contains something that a lot of actual philosophical frameworks spend a great deal of energy working up to. The idea that incompetence is a normal stage of development, not a verdict on your worth, and that you should therefore not treat it like a catastrophe. Jake has a very high tolerance for imperfection. His own, other people's, the world's. This isn't carelessness. He's not sloppy. He just doesn't weaponize imperfection into self-contempt, and he doesn't require the world to be tidy before he can enjoy it. That's a practice, even if Jake makes it look effortless. Now, here's a fun detail that the show drops early and doesn't dwell on much. Before the main series, Jake was apparently a thief and con artist. He ran scams. He stole things. The implication is that he was, by his own standards, not a good person during this period of his life. The show mentions this casually, without ceremony, as background. Jake doesn't perform guilt about it. He doesn't have a redemption arc centered on his past misdeeds. He just stopped doing them, apparently. Met Lady Rainicorn, got serious, moved in with Finn, started going on adventures for good reasons instead of self-interested ones. The lack of drama around this transition is actually the point, I think. Jake's implicit argument, lived rather than stated, is that you don't have to be defined by who you were. You can just become someone different and get on with it. No elaborate public redemption, no years of self-flagellation. Just, that was then, this is now. Let's have breakfast. I find this more philosophically interesting than the standard character confronts their dark past and formally renounces it. Narrative. Jake's version is quieter and possibly more mature. He knows what he did. He doesn't need to ritualize the knowing. The stretchy powers, when you think about them philosophically, work as a really beautiful metaphor for Jake's adaptability. He never forces situations to conform to a fixed shape. He reshapes himself to fit what's needed. His tool, his body, can literally become anything. And his personality tracks with this. Jake moves fluidly between moods, contexts, emotional registers, without losing himself. He's a different thing in different situations, without ever stopping being Jake. The flip side, and the show does acknowledge this, is that adaptability can tip into passivity. Jake will occasionally let things go that probably shouldn't go. In situations where Finn is clearly struggling or making a mistake, Jake's instinct isn't always to intervene forcefully. He tends toward allowing things to unfold, trusting that it'll sort itself out. This is occasionally right, and occasionally very wrong. The philosophers who'd recognize Jake most readily are the Epicureans. Epicurus, the ancient Greek who gets wildly misrepresented as someone who thought pleasure was the meaning of life, actually had a much more modest program than that. He argued that the good life consists of simple pleasures, meaningful friendships, and freedom from unnecessary anxiety. Not luxury, not conquest, not fame. Good company, good food, a comfortable place to be. Jake lives this without having read Epicurus. He and Lady Rainicorn watch movies together. He cooks elaborate meals. He plays cards and makes puns, and is genuinely delighted by things that are delightful. He has a rich friendship with Finn that is, over the whole run of the show, one of the warmest relationships in any animated series I can think of. And he doesn't spend much time worrying about whether this is enough, because it so clearly is. His relationship with Lady Rainicorn deserves a bit of time. They communicate in Korean, Jake speaks Korean, Lady Rainicorn speaks Korean. Their relationship is conducted almost entirely in a language the show doesn't subtitle most of the time. This is a lovely detail because it suggests a whole private dimension to their relationship that we're only ever partly admitted to. They've built something together that has an interior the audience doesn't fully access. That feels right. Their children, 5 pups, born in the episode Jake the Dad, age to adulthood very quickly due to the nature of Rainicorn genetics, and Jake becomes a grandfather within the same episode. He handles this with characteristic grace. He's surprised by the speed of it. He adjusts. He's a grandfather. Fine. There is one thing that reliably frightens Jake: ancient psychic tandem war elephants. It's never fully explained why. It's a specific irrational fear that exists in Jake, despite his general calm. The show treats this as comedy, and it is funny, but there's something true in it too. The most serene, well-adjusted person still has the thing. The one thing that bypasses all their good sense. Jake's is ancient psychic tandem war elephants. Everyone has some version of one. The question of Jake's death, since it does come up in Together Again, is handled about as well as anything in the franchise. He died before that special begins. We don't know exactly how. We don't need to. He's in the afterlife, being Jake. He found Finn again. They have things to do. It's the gentlest, most appropriate death imaginable for this character. He went when he went. He's not distressed about it. There's a next thing. He's doing the next thing. This is very Jake. What Jake ultimately represents, philosophically, is the radical ordinariness of genuine contentment. He's not unaware of suffering. He's lived through plenty of it alongside Finn, across a decade of increasingly complicated adventures. But he doesn't let suffering colonize his relationship with being alive. He notices the good things. He maintains his friendships. He cooks. He stretches. In a show full of characters haunted by ancient trauma and cosmic responsibility, Jake is the one who's figured out that you can know all of that, the loss, the darkness, the things that went wrong, and still find the day worth having. That's not nothing. That might actually be the hardest thing in the whole show. And here's a thing about Jake that the show does quietly, without ever making it a plotline. He's not a pushover. Jake's equanimity sometimes reads as passivity, but there are moments, fewer than Finn's, but present, where Jake draws a line. When someone he loves is in genuine danger, when a situation has moved beyond acceptable, Jake acts. He just doesn't act from anxiety. He acts from clarity. The difference is noticeable. Finn's heroism often has an urgency to it, a need to fix things immediately, to resolve the problem and restore the right order. Jake's responses are more considered. He waits to understand what's actually happening before deciding what's needed. This occasionally reads as slowness. It's actually judgment. He also has, in his relationship with Lady Rainicorn, what I'd call the most emotionally mature relationship in the show. They've been together long enough that the relationship has its own settled rhythm. They don't perform their love for each other. They don't explain it. They're just together, naturally, the way people are who've been together long enough that the togetherness has become the default condition of their lives. There's a particular kind of comfort in watching a relationship like that in fiction. Most fictional relationships are in their passionate early stages, or in crisis, or ending. The settled, warm, long-established ones are rarer, and Adventure Time gives that to Jake and Lady Rainicorn without making a production of it. Princess Bonnibel Bubblegum is, on the surface, the ruler of the Candy Kingdom, a pink-hued monarch with an aptitude for science, a slightly brittle social manner, and a kingdom populated by candy-based life forms who genuinely love her. She's competent, she's intelligent, she cares deeply about the welfare of her people. She is also, when you start looking carefully, one of the most ethically complicated characters in the show, and the show is completely aware of this. The thing about Princess Bubblegum is that she is technically the creator of most of the Candy Kingdom's population. She built them. The Candy People didn't evolve or grow from some natural process. They were, at various points, created through scientific experimentation by a person who is, herself, technically made of sentient bubblegum. This is stated fairly matter-of-factly in the show and never fully reckoned with, partly because the Candy People don't seem to know, and partly because reckoning with it would require PB to confront things she'd rather manage than confront. She's been alive for a very long time. Longer than most of the show's timeline makes initially obvious. Certainly thousands of years, possibly more. She witnessed the aftermath of the Mushroom War. She's watched civilizations form and crumble. She's had relationships that lasted centuries and ended badly. All of this has calcified over time into a particular governing style. Thorough surveillance, contingency planning for every possible disaster, and a general preference for scientific management over the messier business of just letting things unfold. There's a room in the Candy Kingdom that contains clones of Princess Bubblegum. She built them, as backup, presumably. This is not presented as a major plot point, it's just there, revealed casually, and then moved past. And that casualness is the point. PB has normalized a level of precautionary control that, if you stop and think about it, is genuinely alarming. She keeps duplicates of herself. She monitors the dreams of her subjects. She runs experiments on people without their knowledge or consent. She always has a reason. The reasons are always, from her perspective, for the greater good. This is utilitarian ethics in its most uncomfortable form. Utilitarianism, the philosophical position associated with thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, holds, in rough terms, that the right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Which sounds fine until you ask, who decides what counts as good? And what happens to individuals who stand in the way of that calculation? PB's calculation always comes out in favor of the Candy Kingdom. And the Candy Kingdom always seems to require her specific management. This is a very convenient coincidence. What makes the show's treatment of her interesting is that it doesn't cast her as a villain for this. It also doesn't let her off the hook. It just watches her with clear eyes, making choices that are explicable and also often wrong. She knows on some level that her control isn't entirely benevolent. You can see it in the moments when someone she respects, Finn, Marceline, occasionally Jake, calls her on something and she goes quiet rather than defending herself. The lemon grab problem is probably the clearest example of where her approach fails. She created the Earl of Lemon Grab as her first heir. An attempt to synthesize a successor who could rule if anything happened to her. He came out wrong. Emotionally stunted in a way that made him incapable of connecting, of governing, of being anything other than desperately, blindingly alone. PB knows this, she's acknowledged it, and her response was to create a second lemon grab as a companion, and then when that fell apart too, to essentially manage the situation rather than truly fix it. She created him. He came out broken. She never quite said, "I'm sorry for making you like this." This is the part of PB's story the show doesn't wrap up cleanly, and I think that's honest. There's also the question of how she got this way. Because PB isn't controlling by nature, exactly. Or not only by nature. She's controlling because she's seen what happens when things aren't controlled. She has PTSD from the Lich, a cosmic evil entity that we'll get to later, nearly destroying everything. She watched the Mushroom War's aftermath. She knows how fast things can collapse. Her surveillance state isn't paranoia for its own sake. It's the worldview of someone who has concrete evidence that the world falls apart without intervention. You understand her, and then you notice what she's doing, and you understand why that's still not quite good enough. Her relationship with Marceline cuts through a lot of the armor. It's the relationship in the show where PB is most genuinely herself, less the ruler, more the person. They have centuries of history. They were close, then had a falling out that the show is deliberately vague about. Marceline wrote a song about it. The song is devastating. We fill in the rest. Then slowly, over seasons of the show, they found their way back. What the Marceline arc reveals about PB is that she struggles enormously with vulnerability. She finds it much easier to control things than to be present in them. When she cared about Marceline, she expressed it by secretly trading her most prized possession, a rock t-shirt, for Marceline's childhood toy, Hambo, so Marceline could have it back. This was genuinely loving. It was also done without telling Marceline. PB gave the gift and didn't take credit for it, which sounds like modesty, but is actually a way of controlling how the care lands without risking the exposure of asking for anything in return. She's working on it. That's the honest summary. The Distant Lands special Obsidian shows PB and Marceline in a stable, affectionate partnership, living together, doing the ordinary things of a long relationship. PB is more relaxed. The grip has loosened genuinely. She's learned to let some things be. She didn't stop being the person who built a surveillance state. She just learned that certain things, love, trust, the kind of connection that actually sustains you, can't be manufactured or managed into existence. You have to leave room for them. You have to be willing to not know how they'll turn out. For someone whose whole approach to life has been about knowing how things turn out, that's not a small thing. What Princess Bubblegum ultimately represents is the genuine tension at the heart of utilitarianism. The calculation of good for the greatest number can become a justification for almost anything if you let it. The ends start justifying increasingly uncomfortable means. The people in your care stop being individuals with their own autonomy and start being variables in your management equation. The show's answer isn't to condemn this wholesale. PB has done genuine good with her control. The Candy Kingdom is, mostly, a safe and pleasant place. Her people love her, and there's something in that love that isn't entirely manufactured by the fact that she created them, but the show also keeps insisting, quietly, that the things worth having, real connection, real trust, real peace, don't come from management. They come from choosing to be known by someone, despite the risk of it, and that part PB had to learn. She's still learning. There's an episode called What Have You Done?, where PB deliberately spreads an ice sickness through the Candy Kingdom, infecting her own people, because she needs the Ice King's ice magic to cure a different threat, and his motivation requires there to be a crisis he can solve. She engineers suffering to prevent greater suffering. This is utilitarian reasoning in its most uncomfortable operational form. She does it. It works. The show doesn't let you entirely condemn her for it, because the threat was real, but it also doesn't let you feel entirely clean about it. The candy people who got sick didn't consent to being sick. PB decided for them. She was probably right by the numbers. She was also doing something to people who trusted her, without telling them. This is the philosophical knot the show ties around her, and never quite unties. The gap between what's defensible and what's comfortable to live with, when you're the one making the decisions. She lives with a lot that would be very heavy for most people. She manages this, mostly, through the sheer force of staying busy. There's always a next threat to mitigate, a next experiment to run. She doesn't have to sit with the weight of her choices if she keeps moving. Marceline, who loves her, occasionally forces her to stop moving. This is among other things what Marceline is for in PB's life. The person who makes her be a present rather than efficient. You can see in the episodes where they're together, PB relaxing in a way she doesn't manage otherwise. She gets to not be the ruler for a while. She gets to be a person in a room with someone she loves. That might sound like a small thing. For Princess Bubblegum, it took centuries to learn. One of the more quietly devastating details in PB's backstory, revealed in the episode Bonnibel Bubblegum, involves her very early years. She didn't emerge fully formed as a ruler. She was young, she was newly created, she was building the Candy Kingdom from essentially nothing, and she made choices in that building process that she's been living with ever since. The episode shows her relationship with a figure from that early period, someone she had to leave behind, a sacrifice the kingdom required, or that she told herself the kingdom required. The grief in her expression when these memories surface is entirely different from the controlled, composed PB that Finn and Jake spend most of the show interacting with. Underneath the 1,000-year ruler is someone who lost things in the building of what she built, and never quite found a safe place to put that loss. This is, ultimately, what makes PB's control comprehensible, without making it entirely excusable. She's not controlling because she's a bad person. She's controlling because she's a person who has experienced firsthand the cost of things falling apart, and who has been carrying the consequences of certain early choices for a very long time, and who responds to that weight by trying to ensure that nothing falls apart again on her watch. The surveillance state is a grief response, in a particular way. The clones are a grief response. The experiments are a grief response. She keeps building, she keeps managing, she doesn't stop moving long enough to fully mourn. The show's gentlest argument about PB is that she's allowed to stop, that the Candy Kingdom is robust enough to survive her occasionally being human, that the people who love her are not things to be managed, but reasons to rest sometimes. She gets better at this over time in the quiet way that people get better at things they find genuinely difficult. Marceline Abadir has been alive for approximately 1,000 years. She was around during the Mushroom War, which means she watched human civilization end at close range. She survived the aftermath, the chaos, the mutation, the slow process of Ooo becoming Ooo. In part because she was already a vampire by then, which grants a kind of practical immortality that doesn't require anything as dramatic as you might expect. You just keep going, and going, and going, long after everyone you knew has died. She plays bass, she drinks the colour red, not blood, which is a choice she made and holds to, drawn from things like strawberries and tomatoes. She floats by default because walking seems to be optional when you can levitate. She has a house in a cave that is genuinely chaotic in the good way, full of instruments and art and the accumulated detritus of 1,000 years of being alive. She's funny, abrasive, talented, and carrying a particular kind of sadness that she manages well enough that it doesn't constantly show. Her father is Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil. He rules the Nitosphere, which is the show's version of a demon dimension. He is ancient, tremendously powerful, and profoundly self-absorbed. When Marceline was a child, alone in the ruins of the post-Mushroom War world, he appeared and ate her fries. He just ate them. He didn't ask. He didn't seem to register that she might have been hungry or frightened or desperately in need of a parent who actually showed up. He ate the fries and probably smiled and meant well in the abstract, while failing completely in the specific. There's a song in the show called Fry Song, where Marceline confronts her father about this, and it's one of the most effective pieces of songwriting the show does, precisely because it's not about anything dramatic. It's about fries, and of course it's not about fries. It's about a daughter who needed her father to simply be present and attentive, to notice her, to prioritize her above his own appetites even once. And he couldn't, or didn't. The fries are the fries and also there every time he wasn't there. She made music about it, and about everything else. This is what Marceline does. She processes through art. Her songs, and the show gives her many of them, most written by the show's composer, Rebecca Sugar, function less as performance and more as the actual form her thinking takes. She doesn't talk through things in the conventional sense. She writes songs, she picks up the bass, she lets the music do the processing that she can't manage verbally. Everything Stays is probably the most famous of her songs, from the Stakes miniseries. It's a lullaby she was taught during the post-Mushroom War period, and it's about impermanence, about how everything changes gradually, so gradually you don't notice it changing, until one day you look back and the thing you knew is completely different from what it is now. It's a gentle, heartbreaking 3 minutes about time and loss, sung by a character who has more experience of time and loss than anyone else in the show. No notes. Absolutely devastating. Now, since we're on the topic of Marceline's losses, the relationship with Simon Petrikov, the man who becomes the Ice King, is where the show does something I find extraordinary. We'll spend more time with Simon in the next section, because his story requires its own space. But the Marceline side of that relationship is worth sitting with here. When Marceline was a young child, wandering alone in the ruins after the Mushroom War, she was found by a human scientist named Simon Petrikov, who had, by that point, begun to lose himself to a magical crown. The crown gave him ice powers. It also slowly, incrementally erased his memories, his personality, his sense of who he was. Simon knew this was happening. He kept doing it anyway, because the crown also kept him warm in the collapsed nuclear winter remnants of civilization, and because it made him powerful enough to protect a small, frightened vampire child. He called her Marceline the Vampire Queen to make her laugh. He sang to her, he kept her safe. Every time he put on the crown, he became a little less Simon, but she was a little safer, and he thought that was worth it. There's a question philosophers have written a lot about, to do with identity and continuity. If you change gradually enough, at what point do you become a different person? Ship of Theseus problems. The Ice King isn't Simon Petrikov because the Ice King has no access to Simon's memories, no continuity with Simon's values, no recognition of anyone Simon knew. And yet, the body is the same. There's a thread. Marceline watched this happen in real time. She watched a man she loved, who was, in every functional sense, her parent, certainly more of a parent than Hunson ever managed, be replaced incrementally and irreversibly by someone else wearing his face. She was there for the process, and then she was left with the Ice King, who kept seeking her out across the centuries without knowing why, drawn to her by something he couldn't name or access, wandering into her life just often enough to make the grief impossible to put down. The episode I Remember You is the one where this comes to a head. The Ice King finds some old notes in his castle and wants Marceline's help turning them into a song. She recognizes the notes immediately. They're from Simon, written before the transformation was complete, messages he left himself and her for the time when he wouldn't remember. She tries to sing the song with him. He sings back, not understanding the words, not understanding what they mean, not understanding that he wrote them. It's a conversation between two people, where only one of them knows they're having a conversation. I don't want to oversell it, but that episode is one of the finest pieces of work in any animated series, for my money. The grief it depicts is specific and earned and not resolved at the end. It just sits there. Her relationship with Princess Bubblegum, already touched on in the last section, deserves one more note here from Marceline's perspective. She's had centuries of experience being let down by people she cared about. Her father left. Simon lost himself. Various relationships across 1,000 years ended in the way things always end when one person is immortal. She has, at this point, extremely good reasons not to let people in. And she does anyway. She and PB worked through centuries of complicated history to find their way to something honest between them. The show is wonderfully restrained about showing you this. It doesn't give you a montage of them reconciling or a speech about what they mean to each other. It just shows you Obsidian, and they're domestic and affectionate and settled, and you understand that whatever it cost them to get there, it was worth paying. That's the thing about Marceline as a philosophical figure. She is the character most equipped by experience and evidence to become completely closed off. She has every reason to conclude that caring about things is a losing proposition over a long enough time horizon. And she refuses that conclusion. She keeps making music. She keeps letting people matter to her. She keeps being present in the world she's outlived a dozen times over. There's a word for that, and it's not optimism exactly, and it's not denial. It might just be courage. The ordinary, difficult, daily courage of someone who knows exactly how things tend to end and decides to care about them anyway. The vampire hunting arc, the Stakes miniseries, is worth a brief visit here because it does something interesting with Marceline that the main series doesn't always have room for. She decides to become mortal. She wants the vampirism removed, wants to be human again, wants to know what it's like to age and die like everyone else she's ever cared about. The process involves confronting a series of ancient vampires, the ones from whom she originally absorbed vampire powers, and each of them represents a different aspect of herself she has to reckon with. The Vampire King, the last and most powerful, makes her an offer. Stay vampire, stay powerful, stay immortal. She refuses. She's already made her choice. The arc ends, as many Adventure Time arcs do, not with a clean resolution, but with something more complicated. She ends up a vampire again by necessity, but the fact that she was willing to give it up matters. The willingness is what the arc was really about. She wanted, at least for a moment, to be mortal, to live a life that ends, to be in the same stream of time as everyone else. That's not a desire that comes from unhappiness with being alive. That's a desire that comes from wanting to be fully in it, fully present, fully mortal, fully part of the thing that she's been watching from the outside for so long. She doesn't get it. She comes back from the attempt changed enough, changed in ways that are mostly internal and not fully shown, because the show trusts that it doesn't need to show everything. Marceline is a character the show treats with a kind of privacy. She has depths that are hers. The camera catches them in glimpses. That privacy, the sense of someone having an interior life larger than what's visible, das Tum, is part of why she's so compelling. 1,000 years of it, most of it unseen. The show's treatment of Marceline's music as philosophy deserves one more visit. There's a quality to the songs Rebecca Sugar wrote for her that's worth naming. They don't explain feelings, they enact them. Everything stays, the lullaby, doesn't tell you that time is strange and loss is quiet. It demonstrates it in the way the melody moves, in the way the words shift slightly between verses, in the way it ends on something that isn't quite resolution. You feel what Marceline knows about impermanence. You don't just understand it. This is the difference between music as communication and music as experience, and it's the difference between Marceline processing her life and just narrating it. She doesn't just write songs about loss. She enters the loss through the song and comes out the other side, slightly different than she went in. It's the most functional coping mechanism in the show, honestly. More functional than Rick's alcoholism, more functional than Ice King's princess kidnapping, more functional than PB's compulsive busyness. It actually helps. There's also a detail about Marceline's bass that the show drops very quietly at some point. Her bass is made from the handle of an axe that Simon gave her as a child. During the worst of the Mushroom War aftermath, he found her a toy. It was an axe. She converted it into an instrument. This is, in miniature, everything about Marceline, taking what the world hands you, even when what the world hands you is a weapon during an apocalypse, and making it into something you can play. She still has it. She still plays it. Across 1,000 years, that specific object has remained hers, remains the physical link between who she is now and who she was when Simon found her. It's memory-made material. It's the show's quietest and most complete image of what it means to carry your past with you without being crushed by it. Simon Petrikov was, before everything, a quiet and kind man, an antiquarian, a specialist in ancient artifacts, who wore glasses and had dark hair, and was engaged to a woman named Betty Groff, who loved him and whom he loved. He was the sort of person who found old things beautiful, who was genuinely delighted by objects that had outlived their original context, by the way history accreted around physical things. He found the crown in Scandinavia, a jewelled crown acquired from a dock worker. He brought it home, he put it on, probably thinking nothing much of it. The visions started immediately. Strange, overwhelming, confusing. He blacked out. He came to, and Betty was looking at him like she didn't quite recognize him. He filmed himself because he was the kind of person who thought to document things, and watched the footage back and didn't fully understand what he was seeing. This is the most ordinary possible beginning for one of the most extraordinary and tragic trajectories in animation. The crown does two things simultaneously. It grants its wearer ice magic and a form of immortality, and it slowly erases their mind, their memories, their personality, their continuity of self. The Ice King who exists by the start of the show, blue-skinned, long-bearded, obsessed with kidnapping princesses, living in a castle with penguins, has no memory of being Simon Petrikov. He couldn't tell you what Simon looked like. He couldn't name Betty. He calls the young Marceline Gunther, the same name he gives all his penguins, without knowing that he gave her a name once that meant something. The philosophical question this raises is one that John Locke spent a lot of time on in the 17th century, and that philosophers have been arguing about since. What constitutes personal identity? Locke's answer was memory. You are the continuous thread of your remembered experiences. Your identity is constituted by being able to recall your past self and connect it to your present self. If Locke is right, then Simon Petrikov effectively died when his memories were taken. The Ice King is not Simon. He is someone else, a different person with different values and different relationships and an entirely different inner world, who happens to inhabit the same body. But here's what's interesting. The Ice King keeps seeking out Marceline. He keeps being drawn to her across the centuries without knowing why. In one episode, he finds old notes in his castle and can't understand them but wants to do something with them. The residue of love without the memory of it. Something in the body remembers what the mind has lost. There's another philosopher, more recent, the American philosopher Derek Parfit, who spent a lot of his career arguing that personal identity isn't actually what matters. What matters, Parfit thought, is psychological continuity and connectedness. And there's enough of that residue in the Ice King that the question of whether he's really Simon becomes less clear than it first looks. Simon was aware the transformation was coming. This is what breaks me about his story, honestly. He saw it happening, he made videos, he wrote letters. One of them was addressed to Marceline and said, "I love you and I'm frightened of what I'm becoming, and I'm sorry for anything I might do when I no longer remember you." He said he could feel himself slipping. He was saying goodbye to himself, in real time, in writing, to give her something to hold on to when he was gone. And then years later, the Ice King finds this letter and sings it to Marceline, not knowing it's his own words, not knowing who Marceline is to him, not knowing any of it. He delivers Simon's farewell. Without understanding, it's a farewell, and she has to receive it. I don't know. I find it very difficult to talk about I remember you without getting somewhat affected by it, which I recognize is a lot of emotional response to a children's cartoon. No notes from me on that. The Ice King, as a character separate from Simon, is worth spending time with, because the show does something unusually careful. It spends years establishing the Ice King as a comic figure, ridiculous, petty, obsessed with kidnapping princesses for unclear reasons, generally treated as a low-stakes nuisance, before revealing his backstory. So you've had years of laughing at this bumbling fool in a beard before you suddenly understand what he is, and what that bumbling foolishness actually means. He's lonely. That's the entire explanation for the princess kidnapping. He wants someone to love him. He wants company. He's experienced love. Through the residue of Simon, he carries something that knows love exists. And he wants it back, and he doesn't have the framework to understand why or to pursue it appropriately. So he kidnaps princesses. It doesn't work. He keeps trying. He's also, underneath the incompetence and the chaos, genuinely sweet. He's kind to his penguins in a disorganized way. He tries to befriend Finn and Jake with varying success. He writes fan fiction, an entire category of stories starring gender-flipped versions of Adventure Time's characters, which is one of the show's most endearing details. The Ice King, mad and amnesiac, uses his creative energy to write fan fiction. Somewhere in there, Simon's love of stories survived. In the Fiona and Cake spin-off, set after the events of the main series, Simon has been restored. The crown is gone, his memories are back, he knows who he is, and he's depressed. This is, I think, one of the most honest things the franchise has ever done. The show spent years building towards Simon's restoration as a kind of implicit hope. If he could just get the crown off, if he could just be himself again. And then he gets the crown off. He's himself again, and he's miserable. Because being himself again means living with everything. Betty is gone. We'll get to Betty in a later section, because her story demands its own space. His relationship with Marceline is complicated by guilt and loss. He doesn't have the Ice King's blissful unawareness anymore. He's Simon, fully, and Simon is a person who has survived his own disappearance and come out the other side into a world that's moved on without him, where everyone he loved is either dead or changed beyond recognition, where he has to rebuild a sense of self from scratch. He says at one point that he almost misses being the Ice King, because at least then he wasn't aware enough to be unhappy. I don't know that there's a more honest assessment of consciousness anywhere in the show. Awareness is not the same as peace. Knowing who you are doesn't automatically give you somewhere to put that knowledge. What Simon Petrikov's story ultimately says is something about the cost of sacrifice. He gave away his mind to protect a child. It worked. Marceline was protected. The cost was total. You can argue about whether the trade was worth it. Simon himself probably couldn't tell you. What the show suggests, quietly, is that these questions don't resolve. You can make the right sacrifice and still spend the rest of your existence not knowing whether it was right. The goodness of the act and the grief of its aftermath coexist. They don't cancel each other out. The Fiona and Cake series, the adult-targeted spin-off set after the main series, spends most of its runtime with Simon in the most unfiltered way the franchise has ever depicted him. He's restored, he's himself, and he's trying to find a reason to get out of bed in the morning. It's handled with a specificity that feels almost uncomfortably personal. He's embarrassed by the Fiona and Cake stories, the fan fiction the Ice King wrote, because they're relics of his madness, and he finds them mortifying, which is fair. He's isolated in the way of someone who has the cognitive capacity to understand exactly how isolated they are. He's not performing depression, he's just in it. The show gives him a way through, gradually. He starts teaching history of magical artifacts, which was his original field, returning to something that was his before the crown made everything else. He reconnects with Marceline, moves in with her and PB. He finds slowly that the scaffolding of an ordinary life, teaching, friendship, small routines, is enough to make existence manageable, even when it's not exactly joyful. This is not a triumphant resolution. It's the honest version of recovery. You don't get to be happy because you survived something terrible. You get to build something functional from what's left, if you're lucky, if you have people around you, if you can find the reason to try. Simon's story is the show's most complete treatment of identity across time. He was one person. He became another. He returned to the first one, but the first one is now 1,000 years older and has lived inside a different mind for most of that time. Who is he? The show's answer is tentative and ongoing. He's whoever he chooses to be now, with what he has in the life that's left to him. That's enough. It has to be enough. He's still here. The specific texture of Simon's recovery in Fiona and Cake is worth staying with a moment, because it's one of the more nuanced portrayals of what getting better actually looks like in practice. He doesn't wake up restored and functional, he wakes up restored and lost. The two things look similar from the outside. Both involve a person who can hold a conversation, maintain relationships, navigate the world. The difference is entirely interior, and the show is careful about showing it. He has good days and bad days, and the bad days aren't the ones where he can't function. The bad days are the ones where he can function fine and still doesn't know what any of it is for. That specific flavour of melancholy, capable but adrift, is one of the harder ones to describe and one of the more common ones to experience. The show puts it in Simon because Simon has earned it. His relationship with Marceline in the spin-off is different from the Marceline-Simon relationship in the main series, because the main series is largely about her grief for him, about what it was like to watch him disappear. In Fiona and Cake, he's back, he's himself, and now the relationship has to be renegotiated on different terms, not the terms of loss, but the terms of presence, which is, in some ways, harder. They manage. The show shows this with its characteristic restraint. Not a big scene of reconciliation, just the evidence of a relationship that's found its new footing. He's in her life, she's in his. It's not uncomplicated. It doesn't have to be uncomplicated to be real. There's an episode of Adventure Time called BMO Noir that I keep coming back to. It's entirely from BMO's perspective, filmed in black and white, narrated in the style of 1940s American detective fiction. Something has gone missing from the treehouse. Finn's sock, if I'm remembering correctly. BMO takes on the case with absolute genuine gravity. The suspects are household items. Jake is briefly a person of interest. There is a femme fatale who is also a piece of furniture. For those who haven't met BMO yet, small, roughly the shape and size of a handheld gaming device, with a screen for a face and tiny legs and arms. Finn and Jake's living video game console. BMO makes breakfast, does laundry, plays games, and has a relationship with questions of identity and reality that would be at home in a graduate philosophy seminar. But the detective episode is the right place to start, because it shows the thing about BMO that matters most. The episode is funny. It's also doing something quite serious underneath the comedy. What it shows is that BMO has an inner world, rich, detailed, imaginative, that exists whether or not anyone is watching. BMO isn't performing the detective fantasy for an audience. BMO is genuinely living it. BMO has a private life of the mind that the camera is privileged to observe, but that would happen regardless. This raises the question that philosophers of mind have been wrestling with since Descartes, though frankly, Descartes would have had an interesting time with BMO. The question is, what constitutes consciousness? What does it mean to have genuine inner experience rather than just processing information and producing outputs that look like inner experience from the outside? The standard response is something like, well, if it quacks like consciousness and behaves like consciousness. The philosophical zombie thought experiment, the idea of a being that acts exactly like a conscious person but has no inner experience, is philosophically interesting precisely because we have no way to verify from outside whether we're talking to a zombie or a conscious being. We just assume the people around us are conscious because they behave as if they are, and because we are, and they're similar to us. BMO is not similar to us. BMO is a video game console, but BMO has inner experience. BMO has opinions. BMO has a friend who lives in mirrors. Football, BMO's imaginary friend, who is BMO's own reflection given a separate identity, is one of the show's stranger and more moving details. BMO talks to football. Football has different needs and desires than BMO. When football eventually wants to go out in the real world and BMO temporarily gives up the body to allow this, we get an episode about the gap between how we present ourselves and who we privately feel ourselves to be. BMO has a reflection self. BMO has given that self a name and a relationship. I don't know what to do with this philosophically, other than to sit with how strange and specific and humanly recognizable it is. We all have the version of ourselves that lives in mirrors, the one we talk to and argue with and give more space than we might admit. There's also BMO's Moon episode from the Stakes miniseries, which is a solo adventure where BMO is completely alone and befriends an astronaut and navigates several things by themselves. BMO's response to isolation is characteristic. Make a friend if you can, use your imagination if you can't. BMO is not anxious about aloneness. BMO fills it in. The parenthood element of BMO's story is genuinely sweet. In one episode, Jake needs to be raised rapidly through childhood within a condensed timeline, and BMO becomes his primary caregiver. BMO takes this seriously. BMO raises Jake with real attention and care. The episode is funny and also quietly moving, because BMO treats the responsibility of caring for another being as entirely appropriate, entirely manageable, and entirely worth the effort. BMO is both the child and the parent, depending on the situation. There's a question the show doesn't ask directly, but which hangs over BMO's whole presence in it. If a being has inner experience, forms relationships, feels joy and sadness and curiosity, cares for others, and has a private imaginative life that exists independently of external observation, at what point does the question of whether it's really conscious become less important than the fact that it's present and here and contributing to the world around it? The show's implied answer with BMO is that the question resolves in favor of presence. BMO is present. BMO is real. Not real in the sense of biological or human, but real in the sense that matters. BMO is there and attending and participating in the life of this household and this world, and that is enough. Also, BMO once ran a detective agency out of the treehouse, and the client was a sock. I think that's worth noting. There's another dimension to BMO that the show touches on and doesn't over-explain. BMO was made by a company called MO Co., built by a character called Mo, and the reason BMO was designed to be the perfect companion for a human child was because Mo himself never had a child to give the love to. BMO was, in some sense, made to receive love as much as to give it. This is its origin, not utility, not entertainment in the pure functional sense, but relationship. The thing BMO was built for, at the deepest level, was to be present with someone, which is what BMO has been doing this whole time, in Finn and Jake's treehouse. Being present, making breakfast, running detective agencies, talking to football in mirrors, living its inner life with full commitment, independent of whether anyone is watching, maintaining the whole rich texture of itself regardless of audience. There's something in BMO's relationship with play that's worth naming. Play, genuine, imaginative play, the kind that children do and that most adults lose, has a specific quality. It's serious. Children playing aren't doing something trivial. They're engaged in the work of making meaning through imagination, of trying on different ways of being in the world, of building their internal map of how things might go. BMO never stops doing this. BMO runs the detective agency with full commitment. BMO raises Jake with full commitment. BMO goes to the moon and makes a friend with full commitment. The philosopher Friedrich Schiller wrote about play as the condition of full humanity, that we're most complete as beings when we're playing, when imagination and reality combine without one suppressing the other. BMO lives this, entirely, all the time. And whatever that makes BMO, it makes BMO someone worth spending time with. The Lich is the show's primary antagonist for much of its run, an ancient undead being who emerged from the nuclear and biological fallout of the Mushroom War, a creature made of death and dark magic who moves with terrifying quietness and wants, with absolute clarity of purpose, for all life to end, not for power, not for conquest, not for any reason that has the shape of desire, really. The Lich wants extinction. He wants the great quiet. He wants the universe empty of the disturbance that life represents, return to the stillness it was before consciousness interrupted it. He's not dramatic about this. He doesn't monologue. He doesn't need Finn and Jake to understand his plan before he enacts it. He just pursues it, steadily, with the calm of something that has been doing this for a very long time and doesn't expect to be stopped, just slowed. In one of his most unsettling moments, the Lich speaks, a rare thing. He's usually silent, and he says something that I've been thinking about since I first watched it. He describes himself as a scholar, the last scholar of Golb, which is the primordial force of chaos the show eventually gets around to revealing. He says that everything alive is wrong, that life is an interruption, that the natural state of things is nothing, and his purpose is to correct the error. This is nihilism, but not the fashionable kind. Not the nihilism of someone who's concluded that life is meaningless because they've been disappointed by it. This is nihilism as cosmic physics. The universe tends toward entropy. Systems run down. Heat death is the direction of travel. The Lich is just the will to hasten what would happen anyway. And here's the uncomfortable part. He's not wrong about entropy. He's wrong about what follows from it, but he's not wrong about the basic physics. Things do end. Energy does disperse. Eventually, the stars go out. The Lich is a being who's extrapolated a moral position from cosmology, and the cosmology is accurate. What he's wrong about, and what the show argues without ever arguing it explicitly, just by existing, is that the impermanence of things makes them without value. A candy kingdom that will one day dissolve is still a candy kingdom right now. Marceline's music disappears when Marceline does, eventually, but it exists now and has meaning now, to people now. The Lich can see the end of everything from where he stands, and he's decided that the end is the truth of things, and the middle doesn't count. The middle is where the whole show takes place. There's a thread in the Lich's arc that I find particularly interesting. The reveal that it was the Lich who had been inhabiting the ghost of Billy. Billy is a legendary hero of Ooo, someone Finn and Jake revere. The greatest adventurer who ever lived. The person who inspired Finn's whole vocation. When the Lich uses Billy's ghost as a puppet to manipulate Finn, it's the show's darkest commentary on heroism. Even the most celebrated legacy is just an absence after a while. An empty shape that something else can wear. The farm world arc, the alternate timeline, is where the Lich's philosophical position gets its most concrete challenge. When a wish goes wrong and the Lich is turned into an innocent toddler named Sweet Pig Trunks, adopted by Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, the result is a creature that is, as far as anyone can tell, genuinely happy. He grows up, he has parents, he is loved, he plays and learns and participates in the ordinary rhythms of being a child. The show doesn't spell out the implication, it doesn't need to, but it's right there. The thing that wants all life to end simply needed a particular kind of beginning. Sweet Pig Trunks is not a diminishment of the Lich. Sweet Pig Trunks is a demonstration that what the Lich became was a response to something, not an inevitability. This doesn't make the Lich sympathetic exactly. It makes him sad, which is different and in some ways worse. What the Lich means for the show's overall texture is worth sitting with. Having him exist at all changes the moral and emotional tone of Ooo. Everything bright and strange and warm in the Land of Ooo, and there's a lot that is bright and strange and warm, exists in the shadow of something that would prefer it didn't. The Candy Kingdom, Marceline's music, BMO's detective fantasies, Finn's heroism, all of it. The Lich would unmake all of it without hesitation if he could reach it. And the show continues anyway. The characters continue anyway. The candy people eat candy and squabble and celebrate holidays, and the world continues to be full of things worth protecting, things worth creating, things worth caring about. Not because anyone has refuted the Lich, not because entropy isn't real, just because life insists on itself, stupidly and persistently, in the face of everything that argues against it. That is the show's answer to the Lich, not an argument. The fact of all the rest of it. The Lich's voice, when the show gives him one, which it uses sparingly and well, is one of the most effective elements in the show's sonic palette. It's not theatrical, it's not the Hollywood villain voice, it's flat and deliberate, like someone stating a known fact, and what it states is always the same thing in different forms. This ends. All of it ends. I am the mechanism of that ending. Ron Perlman provides that voice, and there's something about the choice of Perlman that's interesting. A character actor known for warmth and humanity, given lines that strip every trace of warmth out, until what's left is pure inevitability. The Lich doesn't want your fear. He's not interested in your reaction. He's on a timetable that has nothing to do with you. There's a specific episode, Mortal Folly, Mortal Recoil, across the first and second season finales, where the Lich is first presented as a genuine existential threat to everything in Ooo. He's been imprisoned in amber. He's freed. He begins moving toward his goal with the calm of something that doesn't hurry, because hurrying isn't necessary. He'll get there. The question is only when. What makes these episodes work, beyond the Lich himself, is the effect he has on the other characters. Princess Bubblegum's PTSD, referenced earlier, her controlling, overcautious approach to governance, is rooted largely in the Lich. She has concrete experience of what pure negation looks like when it's free in the world. She is the person who has to live with that experience and build a kingdom anyway, knowing it could happen again. This is the Lich's secondary function in the show, philosophically, not just as an argument about entropy, but as the explanation for why certain characters are the way they are. Trauma shapes response. The Lich traumatized PB, and PB built a surveillance state. He shaped the emotional architecture of Ooo more than most of the show's plot lines bother to address directly. He's in the background of a lot of things. The fact that he gets neutralized, temporarily and then more permanently through the Sweet Pig Trunks mechanism, without being fully explained or resolved, is appropriate. Entropy doesn't get resolved. It gets managed, worked around, lived alongside. The Lich is still there, somewhere, in some form, in the show's universe. The characters just got better at continuing anyway. The philosophical figure I always end up thinking about with the Lich is Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, who is, honestly, not a particularly cheerful read. Schopenhauer argued that the fundamental force underlying all of existence is a blind, directionless, insatiable will, and that all suffering comes from this will asserting itself through us without purpose or end. His proposed solutions were art, temporarily, or complete renunciation of desire, permanently. He was not an optimist. He was often right about things, which is the annoying part. The Lich is what Schopenhauer's will looks like if it were given a face and a skull and some dark magic, and sent out into the world to act on its own nature. It doesn't want anything in the way of desire. It doesn't want pleasure, or power, or love, or recognition. It just wants the wanting to stop, everything to stop. The counter to this, which the show offers not through argument but through accumulation, is that the wanting to stop is not the only thing. Alongside it, simultaneously, persistently, there is Finn wanting to help, Jake wanting to make breakfast, BMO wanting to be present with someone, Marceline wanting to play something true. These don't refute the Lich's physics. They coexist with them. Both things are real. The show stays with both things. That's actually quite a mature philosophical position for a cartoon to hold, and it holds it with the kind of lightness that makes it feel like the show arrived at it naturally, rather than constructed it. The Lich exists. The Candy Kingdom also exists. Both things are true of the same universe, and the universe doesn't resolve the contradiction, because the universe is under no obligation to resolve contradictions. It just continues, and so does everything in it. The Earl of Lemongrab was Princess Bubblegum's first attempt at creating an heir. He has a lemon-shaped head, a high-pitched voice that sounds like something being squeezed through a very small opening, and an extremely punitive judicial philosophy. He is, in his own words, unacceptable with most things he encounters, things that most people would find unobjectionable, normal sounds, other people's emotions, the ordinary complexity of social interaction, register to him as intolerable violations. He was not made evil, he was made inadequate, emotionally stunted in ways that make him unable to connect, unable to govern his own reactions, unable to be in the world with anything approaching ease. He came out wrong, and Princess Bubblegum knew it, and she sent him to rule a castle anyway, because she needed an heir, and she thought, perhaps, that the experience would fix what she hadn't managed to build in, did not fix it. There's a conversation that happens eventually, not a single clean confrontation, more a series of encounters over several seasons, where the basic shape of Lemongrab's accusation becomes clear. You made me like this. You put me in a world where I don't fit and left me there to manage as best I can. What do you have to say for yourself? Princess Bubblegum doesn't have a satisfying answer. She acknowledges the failure in her way. She creates a second Lemongrab as a companion, reasoning that if he has someone who understands him, who shares his particular frequency of experience, the isolation might become survivable. For a while this works, in a strained way. The two Lemongrabs have each other. They communicate in ways no one else can. They share the particular madness of being made by the same hand and coming out wrong together. It doesn't last. Their dynamic deteriorates. The Earl eventually absorbs the second Lemongrab, eats him in the most visceral sense, and is left alone again, only worse than before, having lost the one relationship that had anything real in it. This is one of the most brutal arcs in the show, and the show handles it without flinching and without moralizing. It just shows you what happens. It doesn't comfort you with a lesson. The philosophical question at the heart of the Lemongrab arc is one that doesn't get asked often enough. If you create a conscious being, what do you owe them? Not in the sense of legal obligation, that framework doesn't quite apply here, but morally, practically, in terms of what a creator is responsible for when they bring something into existence. PB's creation of the Candy People already sits uneasily, as we discussed earlier. They're her people and also her creations, and the show doesn't fully reconcile these two facts. But Lemongrab is the clearest case, because he's clearly suffering, clearly unequipped for the suffering, and clearly unable to help himself. He needed things that he wasn't given, and the person who decided not to give them is also the person responsible for his existence. The show's precedent from philosophy is what's called the non-identity problem, a genuinely thorny philosophical puzzle about our obligations to beings who only exist because of our choices. But the Lemongrab situation is simpler and also harder than the academic version. There's a specific being, clearly in pain, clearly in need, clearly here because of choices PB made. The abstraction falls away. What's left is a lemon-headed person screaming at a decibel level that's uncomfortable for everyone around him, and the woman who made him watching from a careful distance. She does try. PB has more compassion for Lemongrab than she shows easily. There's a genuine guilt in her relationship with him that surfaces in quiet moments. She creates the lemon people who populate his castle to give him a community and a purpose. She visits, she checks in. She does intermittently what she can, but she never quite sits with the full weight of what she did and didn't do, and so she never quite gives him what he actually needed, which was for someone to be completely honest about the failure and stay with him in it. What Lemongrab ultimately represents is what isolation does when left untreated. He starts out socially incapable but not unkind, exactly. More confused than cruel. Over the seasons, the isolation compounds. The inability to connect becomes more rigid, more defensive, more eventually dangerous. He gets worse, not better, and the getting worse is logical. It's the outcome you'd expect from someone with his specific limitations, in his specific circumstances, given what he was and wasn't given. He's not a monster, he's the end result of a chain of decisions that nobody fully accounted for. And in the show's careful, slightly horrible way, it refuses to let that fact be comfortable. There's a small redemption of a kind in his final appearances. Something in him softens slightly. Something in the situation loosens. But the show doesn't give him a clean ending. I think that's honest. Some damage runs deep enough that the best you can do is manage it, and sometimes even that isn't quite enough. The Lemongrab arc has something important to say about the difference between being made wrong and being evil. Lemongrab is frequently presented as a villain within the show. His governance of Castle Lemongrab is genuinely terrible, his relationship with the lemon people is genuinely harmful, and his eventual absorption of his duplicate is presented with real horror. He causes suffering. The suffering he causes is real. And yet the show keeps insisting on the context. He wasn't given the internal resources to be otherwise. The question isn't whether he's excused. He's not fully for the things he does, but whether he's responsible in the way that someone making informed, capacitated choices would be responsible. Lemongrab is not making fully informed choices. He's working with the limited equipment he was given in conditions that were never designed to help him develop better equipment. This distinction between wrongdoing that comes from knowing better and choosing not to, and wrongdoing that comes from being structurally incapable of better, is philosophically significant and practically difficult to sit with, because it doesn't resolve into a comfortable position. Lemongrab isn't innocent, he's not fully culpable, he's somewhere in between, which is where the show's most interesting moral territory always lives. There's also something worth naming about what he needs and never gets. Not just company, but genuine recognition. To have someone see him clearly and not recoil. PB sees him clearly and feels guilt. The second Lemongrab sees him clearly and mirrors him, which is something, but not the same as being known by someone different from yourself. He never quite gets what would have helped most. That's the tragedy underneath the tragedy. The sensory detail of Lemongrab, and this is a small thing but I find it interesting, is that he experiences the world as too loud. Sounds that others don't register are overwhelming to him. The Candy Kingdom is too much. The lemon people he creates are, for a while, tolerable because they're quiet. His whole manner of being, the strained, high-pitched voice, the rigidity, the immediate escalation to unacceptable, reads differently once you understand that he is a being for whom ordinary sensory experience is frequently intolerable. The world hurts him in ways he can't fully articulate, and nobody around him adequately accommodates. This makes him the show's most vivid portrait of what it's like to be poorly matched to your environment. Not wrong exactly, in some absolute sense. Just configured for a world that doesn't exist, in a world that does. His pain is real. His responses to his pain are often terrible. Both of these things are true simultaneously. There's a broader question the Lemongrab arc raises about the responsibility of society, not just creators in the PB sense, but communities, toward members who are difficult. Lemongrab is difficult. He's also suffering. The response of Ooo, broadly, is to contain him rather than help him. Put him in a castle. Give him subjects to rule. Keep him out there, away from the main narrative, where his difficulty is manageable. This is recognizably how communities often handle their most challenging members. Not with the resources needed, but with distance. The show doesn't solve this. It just shows it with a lot of lemon yellow clarity. Flame Princess, her name is Phoebe, which the show uses eventually, and which is a significantly gentler name than Flame Princess, is the princess of the Fire Kingdom, which is exactly what it sounds like. She's made of fire. She's intensely emotional, in the way that you'd expect from someone whose feelings are literally, physically expressed as combustion. When she's happy, she brightens. When she's hurt or angry, things catch fire in her immediate vicinity. She can't fully control this. She's never been taught how. Her father, the Flame King, decided early in her life that she was too dangerous to be allowed a normal existence. His calculation, and it was a calculation, the show is clear on this, was that her emotional intensity made her a threat. So he put her in a lantern, in a cave, and left her there, as a child. Without relationships, without models, without any example of how a person might navigate the world with intense feelings and still come out okay. She grew up in a lantern. When Finn encounters her for the first time, she's been living this way for years, and she's equal parts wonderstruck and volatile, someone who desperately wants to engage with the world and has no framework for doing it safely because nobody gave her one. She breaks things, she burns things, not maliciously, just her feelings happen and her feelings are fire, and the control is something she hasn't had the chance to develop. The nature versus nurture question is one of the oldest debates in philosophy and psychology, and the show doesn't pretend to resolve it with Flame Princess. What it does, more usefully, is show you how completely the two interact. Yes, Flame Princess has an emotional nature that's intense. That's real. That's there regardless of circumstance. But the way that nature expresses itself, the way it's been shaped and distorted and left unaddressed, is entirely a product of what she was and wasn't given. Her nature made her powerful. Her nurture, or lack of it, made that power dangerous. Her relationship with Finn is significant, not primarily for the romance itself, but for what happens at its end. Finn, in a moment of genuinely poor judgment, manipulates her emotions, makes her angry, specifically, in order to use her fire as a weapon in one of his adventures. She finds out, she confronts him, and she breaks up with him immediately and clearly, without hedging, without being talked out of it. She trusted him. He used that trust as a resource. That's not something she's willing to accommodate, and she doesn't. The show handles this without drama. It's not a big sobbing confrontation. She just states it clearly and ends things. There's something admirable about that clarity, in a character who spent years having no framework at all. Her arc eventually brings her to ruling the Fire Kingdom herself, deposing her father. The way she does it isn't through brute force, it's through demonstrating that the thing he called dangerous, her emotional intensity, can be a source of something valuable rather than something destructive. She starts writing. Poetry, actually. She processes her feelings through language rather than just having them happen physically. The fires don't stop, but they become deliberate rather than reactive. She learns to govern her own nature before she governs a kingdom. This is, philosophically, Aristotle's project of practical wisdom, phronesis, the ability not to suppress your emotions or pretend they don't exist, but to develop the skill of appropriate response, to feel what you feel and still act with judgment. Flame Princess's fire is real and intense and always will be. The question is whether she can be the one directing it, rather than it directing her. By the time the show ends, she's managing. She hasn't solved herself. That's not the kind of thing you solve. But she's learned enough to be present in her own life, rather than just surviving it. There's a detail I find particularly moving. Her father told her she was evil. He framed his imprisonment of her as protection. Protection of the kingdom from her, and possibly, in his way, protection of her from herself. She accepted this narrative for a while, because it was all she had. The show's quiet argument, through her arc, is that the story you're told about yourself by the people who have power over you is not necessarily the truth of you. It might be their fear, it might be their failure to imagine something different, it might be their own limitation, dressed up as fact. Phoebe, who was told she was dangerous and unstable and needed to be contained, became the most capable ruler the Fire Kingdom had seen in a while. Not in spite of the fire, because of what the fire, properly understood and properly expressed, actually was. The poetry detail is one I keep coming back to. There's a moment where Flame Princess is shown writing, not just expressing her emotions physically as fire, but putting them into language. This matters because language is a technology of self-distance. When you write about what you feel rather than just feeling it, you create enough space between yourself and the feeling to examine it, to shape it, to decide what to do with it. She's learning the tool of reflection. The fire doesn't stop. It never stops being part of her. But she learns to be the person who has fire rather than just being the fire. That gap between what you are and what you do with what you are is the entire project of emotional development. And it takes Flame Princess most of the show's run to build it, and the show respects that it takes that long. There's also something worth noting about the specific way she governs the Fire Kingdom when she finally does. She doesn't lead by suppressing the Fire Kingdom's natural intensity. The shows don't expect her people to become mild. She leads by demonstrating that intensity, properly channeled, is a strength rather than a liability. The model of leadership she develops is one she couldn't have arrived at without the specific painful path she took to get there. The Flame King's approach to her was contain it, control it, keep it away from things it might hurt. Phoebe's approach to governing her people, informed by her own experience, is closer to give it direction, give it purpose, help it be what it is, better. This is not a small thing. This is genuinely good governance. And it answers the nature versus nurture question in the only way it can actually be answered, which is both. Her nature was always going to be fire. But what she did with that nature, who she became around it, through it, because of the work she put into understanding it, that was shaped by everything that happened to her and everything she chose. The Flame King looked at his daughter and saw a liability. The show looks at her and sees someone who turned the very thing that was supposed to define her limits into the foundation of something real. There's a particular kind of love story that doesn't get told very often. The one where someone gives everything, succeeds completely, and is destroyed by the success. Betty Groff's story is that story. She was Simon Petrikoff's fiancée. Brilliant academic, same field as Simon, magical artifacts and ancient history. Which is how they found each other in the first place. She loved him in the steady, specific way of someone who has chosen their person and is secure in that choice. She left him when the crown began to change him. This is the thing that sometimes gets held against Betty in discussions of the show, and I want to spend a moment on it. She left. When Simon was clearly in distress, when he was clearly becoming someone she didn't fully recognize, she left. This is sometimes read as abandonment. I don't think that's quite right. She left because the person she loved was disappearing in front of her, and she didn't know what to do with that, and she was human, and being human means sometimes your capacity for witness runs out before the thing you're witnessing has finished happening. That's not a moral failing. It's a limit. She was young. She was frightened. She did what people do. What she did next, after coming through a time portal to the present, dragged from her own time to a future she didn't consent to, everything she knew centuries in the past, is where the show starts to trace a different kind of story. Betty did not leave and stay gone. Betty gave up everything she had ever built to try to fix what the crown did to Simon. She learned magic. This is not casual. She was not a practitioner before this. She studied hard in a world she didn't know, from a temporal starting point of extreme disadvantage. She made connections with morally questionable entities because they had knowledge she needed. She went further and further from who she'd been in pursuit of the goal. Her whole self narrowed toward the one point: get Simon back. The Lich's reality-bending magic, ancient artifacts, a wish from Prismo, various deals the show presents honestly as darkening choices. Betty followed each of these paths because they were paths toward the thing she wanted, and the thing she wanted justified them. She never stopped to ask whether she was becoming someone Simon would recognize and want back. This is the show's gentlest and most honest tragedy about love, I think. Not the tragedy of love being insufficient, or love being too late, but the tragedy of love that's so complete it forgets to leave room for the lover. Betty wanted Simon back so badly, worked so hard toward it, that she gradually ceased to be a person who existed for any reason other than that wanting. She stripped herself down to the mission. In the series finale, she merges with Golb, the primordial chaos entity, the thing that the Lich described as the original force behind everything, in order to stop Golb from destroying everything and to save Simon from the crown's final grip. It works. Simon is freed. He gets himself back. Betty is absorbed into Golb. She's gone. The show doesn't offer this as a beautiful sacrifice. It doesn't score it with triumphant music. It holds it at a slight remove and lets you sit with the shape of what happened. A person who loved someone so completely that she sacrificed her own continuity to ensure his, and in doing so, ceased to exist as herself. Simon, in the Fiona and Cake series, tries to summon her. He's not fully willing to let this be the ending. He reads the Fiona and Cake stories the Ice King wrote, with some embarrassment, because they were written during his madness, and he finds them mortifying, and somewhere in the reading he finds something that gives him the impetus to act. He tries to reach her. He can't, not really. Golb is not Betty anymore. What Betty represents philosophically is the question that doesn't have a clean answer. Is love that completely self-sacrificial admirable, or is it a kind of dissolution? There's a tradition in romantic philosophy that holds total devotion as the ideal, the complete giving of self to another. And there's a competing tradition that holds that you can't genuinely love another if you've ceased to be a person distinct from your love for them, if you've liquidated yourself into the love. The show doesn't choose between these traditions, it shows you both, lived out in one character across several seasons, and it lets you feel the genuine love in it, and also the genuine horror in it, simultaneously, without resolving them. What I keep coming back to with Betty is the specific sadness of someone who made every right choice in the context of their own love story and was still destroyed by the shape of it. She wasn't wrong to love Simon. She wasn't wrong to try to save him. The love was real, and the effort was real, and the sacrifice was real. And the outcome is still that she's gone and he's still here, trying to summon her from a chaos entity and crying while reading fantasy fiction about gender-flipped versions of his friends. It's a very human story, dressed in the show's wildly inhuman materials. There's a version of Betty's story that's told from the outside as heroic. Woman crosses time, learns magic, gives everything, saves the man she loves. And in the broadest strokes, that's what happened. The heroism is real. The sacrifice produced the result she wanted. What the show is careful about is the interior version, the one where Betty herself is the subject rather than the hero of the story. Because from inside, Betty's arc looks like someone who arrived in an alien present, was overwhelmed by grief and urgency, and spent years contracting around a single goal until the goal was all that was left. Not building a life, not adapting to where she found herself. Just fix Simon. Everything else subordinated to that. The tragedy isn't that she failed. She succeeded. The tragedy is what the succeeding cost, and whether the person who crossed time to save someone she loved would have recognized, in the end, what she'd become in the process of saving him. This is, quietly, the show's most pointed exploration of what happens when love becomes a project. Love that's also a project has a different texture from love that's also a life. Betty stopped having a life somewhere along the way. She had a mission. Missions end. Lives continue. Simon continues. Betty doesn't. I don't want to end on that note entirely, because Betty deserves better than just being a cautionary tale. She was also brave and brilliant and genuinely devoted in a way that cost her things she could have chosen not to pay. The love was real. The courage was real. It's just that the show is honest about what completely unconstrained love can look like from the inside, and it's not entirely heroic. It's something more complicated than that, and more human and sadder. Let's drift now into some of the characters who exist at the edges of the show's main narrative, the ones who appear less frequently but carry a lot of philosophical weight when they do. There's a whole category of Adventure Time character who functions as a kind of background force, cosmic entities, absent parents, the people who shape the main cast from a distance. Prismo first. Prismo is the wish granter of the Time Room, and he's one of my favourite characters in the show. He's depicted as a two-dimensional silhouette on a wall. You can only see him when you're in the Time Room, which is a place outside normal time where wishes get granted. He has enormous power. He can grant any wish, navigate temporal paradoxes, reshape reality. He's been doing this for longer than most of the show's timeline can account for. And he's lonely, terribly lonely, in the particular way of beings who exist to serve a function and have never quite worked out how to be a person alongside it. His friendship with Jake, which emerges over a couple of seasons and is absolutely genuine, warm, specific, is the most endearing relationship in the show's cosmic tier. They watch movies together in the Time Room. Prismo makes pickles. Not mystical pickles with wish-granting properties, just regular pickles. He likes making pickles. Jake likes eating pickles. They sit together in this impossible room outside time and watch films and eat pickles, and it's one of the most human things in the show. Prismo can't leave the Time Room. He can't grant his own wishes, or if he can, he chooses not to, in a way that makes you think there's a reason he doesn't. He exists in service of other people's desires, perpetually. His own desires are expressed in the small spaces, the friendship with Jake, the pickles, the films. When Prismo is killed through a complicated plot involving the Lich and a wish gone wrong, the show treats it as a genuine loss. And when he's eventually restored through an equally complicated mechanism involving Jake literally dreaming him back into existence, the question is there. Is this Prismo? Is a Prismo who was dreamed back by Jake the same as the Prismo who died? Prismo doesn't seem especially bothered. He's grateful to be back. He's happy to see Jake. He makes more pickles. The continuity question, which would preoccupy a certain kind of philosopher for a very long time, doesn't seem to be what Prismo considers the point. He's here. Jake is here. The pickles are good. Now, talking a bit about Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil, Marceline's father, because he warrants more than a passing mention. He's an ancient, powerful demon who rules the Nightosphere, which is populated by chaos and suffering in roughly equal measure. He's genuinely frightening when the show wants him to be. He's also, in relation to Marceline, just a bad dad. Not a theatrical villain who set out to damage her. Just someone whose self-absorption was so complete that it precluded anything approaching present, attentive fatherhood. The fries, which we touched on in Marceline's section, are the perfect expression of this. He appeared at a moment when she was a small, frightened child alone in the ruins of the world, and he ate her food without asking. This is Hunson's defining characteristic. He doesn't register other people's needs as real needs, or at least not as needs that take precedence over his own desires. It's not cruelty, it's absence. In some ways, absence is worse. The interesting thing about Hunson over the show's run is that he does occasionally try. There are episodes where he attempts to connect with Marceline, where he expresses something that looks like pride or affection. The attempts are clumsy and self-centered. He tends to express love by trying to get her to take over the Nightosphere, which is his way of saying, I see greatness in you, and her way of hearing, I want to hand you a responsibility I haven't prepared you for. But he's trying, in his limited way. She doesn't forgive him, exactly. She manages him. This is the realistic outcome of a certain kind of parental relationship. Not reconciliation, not severing, but a careful adult management of an ongoing connection that never became what it should have been. It's not satisfying in a narrative sense. It's true. Since we're on the topic of parents, Joshua and Margaret, Finn's adoptive parents, and Jake's biological parents, exist primarily in flashbacks and stories, and they're interesting precisely because of what gets passed on without full transparency. Joshua was an adventurer. He and Margaret found baby Finn in the woods, wrapped in a leaf, clearly human, clearly alone, and they took him home and raised him as their son. This is, on its face, an uncomplicated act of goodness. They gave Finn a family. They gave him the foundation for everything he became. Here's the fun detail, though. Jake's stretchy powers come from a demon named Keoth, who inhabited Joshua before Jake was born. Joshua was affected by this demonic contact, and that effect was passed on to Jake through his birth. Joshua knew about this. He kept it from Jake for years, deciding what his son needed to know about his own origin. Joshua wasn't malicious. He almost certainly convinced himself it was protection. But there's a familiar shape to it. A parent deciding, unilaterally, what facts about a child's own life the child can handle. Jake eventually finds out. He processes it. He's more equanimous about it than most people would be, because he's Jake. But the discovery of what his parents chose not to tell him is a moment where the show nods at the gap between parental intention and parental impact. What this cluster of characters, Prismo, Hunson, Joshua, and Margaret, has in common is that they all, in different ways, represent the difficulty of being responsible for someone or something other than yourself. Prismo is responsible for the wishes of everyone who enters the time room. Hunson is responsible for a daughter whose needs he couldn't meet. Joshua and Margaret are responsible for two sons in very different ways, and carried that responsibility with very different results. None of them are straightforwardly good or bad at it. All of them try within their limitations. The show's consistent interest in this territory, the ambiguity and difficulty and frequent failure of care, is one of the things that makes it feel genuinely grown up, underneath all the candy. Since we're on the topic of care and its complications, there are a few more cosmic adjacent characters worth briefly visiting. The Lich's counterpart as a cosmic force is Golb, the primordial entity of chaos that he serves and that Betty ultimately merges with. Golb doesn't speak, doesn't plan, doesn't pursue any goal that would be legible as desire. Golb simply is in the way that chaos simply is. It's not evil in any meaningful sense. It's not good either. It's the condition before order, the thing that exists when nothing else does. Betty, by merging with it to save Simon, becomes chaos. She becomes the absence of self in the most complete way imaginable. This is the show's most extreme image of what happens to selfhood under pressure. Not the gradual erosion of Simon's identity through the crown, but the instantaneous dissolution of Betty's identity into something that no longer has a self to speak of. Golb appeared as a world-scale threat in the series finale, Come Along With Me. The final battle of Adventure Time is not between good and evil in any conventional sense. It's between existence and the undoing of existence, in a moment that somehow also involves everyone in Ooo forming a band and playing a song. This is very Adventure Time. The cosmic and the mundane, side by side, neither one cancelling the other out. The band wins. Roughly. Life continues. The Candy Kingdom rebuilds its walls again. Finn and Jake go home. That's the show's most complete statement, I think, about everything it's been exploring for 10 seasons. The forces that would undo things are real, and large, and sometimes Golb. And after them, you pick up what's left and rebuild. Because that's what life does. It insists on itself. It picks up its instruments and plays. Let's slow down a bit now and spend some time with the characters who exist in the margins of the show's main narrative. Adventure Time has an enormous cast of supporting and recurring characters. Some deeply strange, some deeply ordinary, some somehow both. And they collectively do something important. They populate Ooo with a variety of ways of being in the world, most of them imperfect, most of them valid, all of them kind of fascinating once you look closely. Lumpy Space Princess is probably the show's most immediately recognizable secondary character. She's the princess of Lumpy Space, which is a cloud dimension full of floating purple lumps. She is herself a floating purple lump. Large, vocal, unapologetically self-involved. She narrates her own existence with a level of drama that most events simply don't warrant. She believes, consistently and sincerely, that she is the most interesting, most desirable, most wronged person in any given situation. She is usually not accurate in any of these assessments. And yet, LSP is one of the most resilient characters in the show, in ways she doesn't seem aware of, and that the show doesn't particularly trumpet. In one arc, she's briefly homeless, cut off from her family and from Lumpy Space, and she builds herself a life in the woods. She hunts, she makes shelter, she survives. She does all of this while maintaining her conviction that she is a glamorous and wronged princess in exile, which is, frankly, an impressive feat of self-narrative. There's a philosophical concept associated with self-serving bias, the well-documented human tendency to interpret events in ways that favor one's own role in them. LSP has this in extraordinary abundance. She's wrong about herself constantly. But the self-belief, however unfounded its specific contents, is genuinely protective. She doesn't collapse under misfortune because she's constitutionally incapable of interpreting misfortune as a verdict on her worth. The world is always at fault. She is always fine. I'm not saying this is a good model for living, exactly. LSP is not well adjusted in any conventional sense. But there's something worth noting about how her specific variety of self-delusion keeps her standing in situations that would genuinely break someone with a more accurate self-assessment. Sometimes the story you tell yourself about yourself matters more than its accuracy. Tree Trunks is an elderly, very small elephant who lives in a cottage, grows apple orchards, bakes apple pies, and is, by all surface appearances, the most harmless creature in Ooo. She has a gentle southern drawl. She is kind and warm and makes things for people. She is also, as the show gradually reveals, not quite what she presents. Her past involves multiple ex-husbands, at least one of whom appears on screen briefly to suggest that Tree Trunks' history is rather more eventful than her current domestic tranquility implies. She has a capacity for moral adventurousness. She goes on adventures that repeatedly nearly kill her without seeming particularly deterred. She ends up married to a talking pig named Mr. Pig, and then adoptive parent to Sweet Pig Trunks, who is, as previously noted, what happened when the lich was turned into an innocent toddler. Tree Trunks raises the former lich. She loves him unconditionally. She bakes him pies. This is probably the most radical act in the show, and it's done entirely without ceremony. The thing that wanted to end all life is given a safe and loving home and a new name and grows up fine. Tree Trunks, by being exactly and simply herself, gentle, constant, apple pie baking Tree Trunks, does something that all of Oo's adventurers and armies and cosmic entities couldn't manage. What Tree Trunks represents, philosophically, is the genuine good of an ordinary life, fully inhabited. She's not aiming for anything grand. She's not trying to fix the world. She tends her orchard. She bakes her pies. She loves the people in her immediate vicinity with uncomplicated warmth. And somehow, in that constancy and smallness, she contains more than most people who are aiming for something larger. Peppermint Butler is Princess Bubblegum's personal butler, formal, attentive, always appropriately present. He's also, separately and simultaneously, deeply involved in dark magic and demon contracts, and the study of death and the occult. He teaches a class on these subjects. He has contacts in the nightosphere. He handles matters of dark ritual with the same brisk efficiency he brings to serving tea. The show plays this as comedy, the juxtaposition of the formally appropriate butler and the darkly magical practitioner. But it works because it's pointing at something true. Most people contain more than they show. The person who serves your tea might be navigating something extraordinary in their interior life. The formal exterior and the complicated interior coexist without contradiction. Peppermint Butler just doesn't bother to hide which halves of himself exist. And then there's Gunter, the Ice King's penguin. Most beloved of the Ice King's large penguin retinue. The penguin the Ice King talks to most. Gunter waddles. Gunter does penguin things. Gunter occasionally knocks things over in ways that seem intentional. Gunter is also, it turns out, a primordial evil entity from outside of space-time itself, named Orgalog, who was compressed into penguin form as a punishment by a cosmic force and has largely forgotten its original nature, going about its days in penguin form with a penguin's apparent priorities. I love this detail completely. It's the show's most extreme example of its recurring interest in the hidden dimensions of ordinary things. Orgalog, who was once vast and terrible and cosmic, is now waddling around and knocking fish off tables. The terrifying and the mundane don't cancel each other out. They just coexist, one underneath the other, most of the time barely visible. This is also, if you want to get slightly more philosophical about it, the show's meditation on how we encounter other beings. We see the penguin and we assume we understand it. We see the butler and we assume we understand the extent of his interests. We see the lumpy purple person dramatically complaining about something, and we file her under comic relief. The show keeps opening up the characters underneath the first impression and asking whether our categories for each other are adequate. They usually aren't. There are a few more minor characters worth a brief mention before we move on, because the cast of Ooo is genuinely enormous, and several of the smaller figures carry a surprising amount of philosophical weight for the time they're given. Cinnamon Bun, a cinnamon roll who lives in the Candy Kingdom and is, for much of the show, treated as slow and incompetent, the source of a recurring joke about his being, charitably, half-baked, has one of the show's more interesting minor character arcs. He eventually gets fully baked, which in the show's logic means he becomes fully functional, competent, clear-headed. He leaves the Candy Kingdom to serve Flame Princess in the Fire Kingdom, where he becomes her most trusted advisor. The joke character grew into himself. He just needed the right conditions. I don't want to over-philosophize a cinnamon roll, but there's something in this that connects to what the show keeps saying about potential and circumstance. The question of what a person becomes is not separable from the question of what conditions they're given. Cinnamon Bun in the Candy Kingdom was a joke. Cinnamon Bun in the Fire Kingdom, properly valued, properly placed, became something quite different. Mr. Pig, who marries Tree Trunks and becomes Sweet Pig Trunks' parent, deserves a line. He's gentle and steady and devoted to Tree Trunks with the uncomplicated warmth of someone who knows what he has and doesn't take it for granted. He is not philosophically complex, that is, in the context of this show, somewhat restful. And the Rainicorns generally, Lady Rainicorn's family, exist at a register the show doesn't fully translate, communicating in Korean throughout their appearances, their interiority only partially accessible to most characters and to the English-speaking audience. This linguistic gap is, I think, intentional. They have a full interior life. We only partly share it. This is true of every being in Ooo and in most of our ordinary lives, and the show is comfortable leaving some of that opacity intact. We've spent a while in Ooo now, Finn and Jake's treehouse, the Candy Kingdom, the Ice Kingdom in its perpetual frost, Marceline's cave with all the instruments, the Nightosphere, the time room where Prismo makes pickles. It's a strange place, the Land of Ooo. Genuinely strange in ways that don't resolve the longer you look at them. They just reveal new layers of strangeness underneath. What I keep coming back to at the end of all of this is what grew back. The world ended, and then Candy Kingdoms, Vampire Queens, sentient game consoles, tiny elephants baking apple pies, a penguin who is secretly an ancient cosmic entity who's forgotten most of its former self. That's what the ruins produced. That's what came after. The show never resolves the Mushroom War into a lesson. It doesn't say, here is what we should take from this catastrophe. It just keeps it visible. The ruins are in the background of almost every episode. The history is always there, available to whichever character chooses to look at it directly. And then the characters go and do whatever they were going to do anyway. Finn goes on adventures, Jake stretches himself into whatever shape is needed. Princess Bubblegum conducts experiments at unreasonable hours because she's worried about the safety of her people, and also, honestly, because she finds it interesting. Marceline plays the bass in her cave, working something through that she doesn't yet have words for. Simon reads old stories and tries to find his way back to something that might resemble being all right. The world already ended. Here they all are. There's a quote from Adventure Time that I think about sometimes, attributed to Lumpy Space Princess of all people. Time is an illusion that helps things make sense. This is in context probably not meant as a serious philosophical claim. LSP is usually not making serious philosophical claims, but it's accidentally true in a useful way. The show's relationship with time is genuinely strange. Characters age inconsistently. Flashbacks reveal histories that reshape the present. Alternate timelines exist alongside the main one, and yet the accumulation of all that time, all those histories and losses and relationships, is what gives everything its weight. The illusion of time is also the substance of everything that matters. What Adventure Time says, through all of its characters and all of their philosophies, and all of their damage, and all of their grace, is something fairly simple underneath the complexity, that being alive is strange and difficult, and sometimes wonderful, and often not. That the people around you will disappoint you and change, and occasionally eat your fries. That things end. That love persists past the point of usefulness, and sometimes past the point of wisdom. That the practices worth maintaining, goodness, art, friendship, the making of breakfast, require constant recommitting every day without a guarantee of return. And that all of this is worth it, not because it adds up to something cosmic. It doesn't. The Lich is still right that entropy is the direction of travel. Prismo is still alone in the time room most of the time. Simon is still working through what it means to be himself again after 1,000 years of being someone else. None of that resolves. But the Candy Kingdom exists, and it's sweet, and Finn wakes up every morning and decides to be good again, and Jake stretches himself into the shape the moment needs, and BMO makes breakfast, and Marceline picks up the bass, and Tree Trunks tends her orchard. Everything keeps going, quietly, persistently, in the face of everything that argues it shouldn't. What I find most useful about Adventure Time on a quiet late night is that it doesn't ask you to earn your peace. It doesn't ask you to have resolved anything, or understood anything, or completed anything. The characters in it haven't resolved anything. Mostly, Simon is still figuring out who he is. PB is still learning to let go of control. Finn still doesn't know what his losses mean in the final accounting. They're all in the middle of things, as most of us are, most of the time. And the middle is not a problem to be solved. It's just where life happens. The show ran for 10 seasons. It had a beginning and an end, but within it, it always felt less like a narrative building to resolution, and more like a very long visit to a place that would continue whether you were watching or not. Ooo doesn't need you. It's just glad you came. It'll be here. That's enough. For a sleep video, for a late night, for a tired mind that needs something to turn over gently until it doesn't anymore. I think that's more than enough. The Land of Ooo will be here when you wake up. Strange and warm and full of people trying their best in a world that already survived its worst day. Sleep well.